The emergency room was chaos. Another car accident victim rushed in, barely alive. Dr. Rodriguez scrubbed in for what seemed like a routine surgery. Then he saw the patient's face. It was the man who had killed his family 10 years ago. The same man who walked free after just 3 years in prison. Now, his life was in Michael's hands. Welcome to Still Human. Here we explore the deepest stories of humanity. In this story, you'll witness the ultimate test of the Hippocratic Oath. When a doctor's professional duty collides with personal vengeance, what happens? This is a story about forgiveness, justice, and the impossible choices that define who we really are. Before we dive into this powerful story, we're curious. Where are you watching from? Which city? Which country? Share in the comments. We love connecting with story enthusiasts worldwide. And if you believe these profound human dilemmas deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because every day, we share stories that challenge everything you think you know about right and wrong. October 15th, 2019, St. Mary's Hospital, Chicago. The city's trauma center where miracles and tragedies happen side by side, sometimes within minutes of each other. Dr. Michael Rodriguez had been working the night shift for 12 years. In those years, he'd seen everything. Overdoses that turned teenagers into vegetables, stabbings that tore families apart, heart attacks that stole grandfathers from Christmas dinners, car crashes that left children orphaned. After thousands of surgeries, after 3,247 lives saved and 127 lives lost, he thought nothing could surprise him anymore. His hands had become instruments of life and death, steady and sure, guided by 15 years of medical training and a decade of grief that had hardened into professional perfection. He was wrong about the surprises. Because that night, the past would walk through his emergency room doors on a gurney, bleeding and unconscious. And Michael would face a choice that would test everything he believed about justice, mercy, and what it means to be human. But to understand that choice, you need to understand the man making it. You need to know what happened 10 years ago. You need to know about Sarah and Emma. And you need to know why the name David Chen had been burned into Michael's memory like a brand. Dr. Michael Eduardo Rodriguez, 45 years old, 6 feet tall, graying hair that had once been jet black, steady hands that had saved over 3,000 lives, and eyes that carried the weight of the world. Chief of cardiac surgery at St. Mary's Hospital, respected by colleagues, loved by patients, feared by medical students who knew his reputation for perfection. Published researcher, conference speaker, the kind of doctor other doctors called when their own family members needed surgery. But behind those professional achievements, behind the white coat and the MD, Michael hadn't always been the grim, focused surgeon his colleagues knew. 10 years ago, he had been a different man entirely. A man who laughed, a man who sang in the shower, a man who believed the world was fundamentally good, and that love could conquer anything. 10 years ago, Michael had a life worth living. Her name was Sarah Elizabeth Chen Rodriguez, and yes, the irony of that last name would haunt Michael for years to come. Blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, infectious laugh that could light up a room, kindergarten teacher who believed every child deserved a chance and spent her own money on school supplies when the budget ran short. Sarah, who made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse on Saturday mornings. Sarah, who fell asleep reading medical journals because she wanted to understand Michael's work. Sarah, who cried at animal commercials and insisted they donate to every charity that called. Sarah, who was 5 months pregnant with their second child when she died. And Emma, sweet, brilliant, gap-toothed Emma Rodriguez, 8 years old, with her mother's laugh and her father's stubborn determination. Emma, who wanted to be a veterinarian so she could help animals the way Daddy helps people. Emma, who collected stethoscopes and stuffed animals with equal passion. Emma, who had already picked out names for her baby brother and painted a nursery mural of farm animals so baby Miguel won't be scared. They were Michael's world, his everything, his reason for getting up in the morning, and his peace at the end of every day. December 23rd, 2009. 2 days before Christmas, Sarah had taken Emma shopping at Northbrook Mall for last-minute presents. She'd found the perfect gift for Emma, a real stethoscope from the medical supply store, child-sized but functional. "Now I can help Daddy save people," Emma had said, her eyes bright with joy. They were driving home at 4:30 p.m., Christmas music playing on the radio, Emma singing Silent Night from her booster seat in the back, Sarah humming along while she drove. The trunk was full of wrapped presents. The car smelled like hot chocolate from their mall food court stop. Sarah had called Michael from the car. "We're 5 minutes away. Emma wants to show you her new stethoscope. She's been practicing on her teddy bear the whole way home." Michael had been at the hospital, finishing his last surgery before his holiday break. He was planning to surprise them with tickets to Disney World for New Year's. He'd already booked the flights. That was the last normal conversation of Michael's life. At 4:47 p.m., David Chen ran the red light at the intersection of Lake and Wabash. Blood alcohol level 0.18, nearly twice the legal limit. Behind the wheel of a stolen pickup truck, racing through Chicago streets to meet his dealer before Christmas. Text messages on his phone showed he was arguing with his supplier about prices, typing while driving. He never hit the brakes. The impact crushed the passenger side of Sarah's sedan. The physics were brutal and simple. A 6,000-pound pickup truck traveling at 65 miles per hour versus a 3,000-pound family car stopped at a red light. The car was compressed by 3 feet. The jaws of life took 47 minutes to extract the bodies. Sarah died instantly. The coroner said she never felt any pain, that the impact had been so severe that her brain shut down before the pain signals could register. Michael held on to that small mercy like a lifeline. Emma lived for 3 hours and 17 minutes. They brought her to St. Mary's Hospital, to Michael's hospital, to the trauma bay where Michael had saved thousands of other people's children. Michael performed CPR on his own daughter, while his colleagues, his friends, people who had been to Emma's birthday parties, tried to save her life. He pushed on her tiny chest and breathed into her lungs and begged God to take him instead. But trauma medicine has its limits. Even love has its limits. At 8:04 p.m., Emma Rodriguez was pronounced dead. The baby, Miguel, as Emma had named him, died with Sarah. David Chen? He walked away from the crash with a broken nose and 3 stitches. The truck's airbags had deployed perfectly. He was treated and released from the hospital before Sarah's body had even been removed from the morgue. The trial was a mockery of justice that lasted 6 weeks and destroyed what remained of Michael's faith in the world. David Chen's lawyer painted him as a victim of addiction, a good man who had made a terrible mistake. Character witnesses testified about his volunteer work, his plans to get clean, his remorse. The defense argued for rehabilitation over punishment, healing over retribution. The prosecutor, overwhelmed with cases and underfunded, presented the facts mechanically. Blood alcohol level, speed, the physics of impact. But facts don't capture the sound of Christmas music still playing in a crushed car. Facts don't capture the sight of wrapped presents scattered across broken glass. Michael testified for 2 hours about his family, about Sarah's dream of teaching inner-city kids, about Emma's collection of medical toys, about the baby they would never meet. He spoke calmly, professionally, because screaming wouldn't bring them back. David Chen testified for 20 minutes. He said he was sorry. He said he took full responsibility. He said he wanted to make amends. He never looked at Michael while he spoke. The judge sentenced David Chen to 8 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter. With good behavior and overcrowding, he served 31 months. 2 years and 7 months for 3 lives. Michael had counted every single day. The civil lawsuit awarded Michael $2.3 million in damages, blood money. He donated every penny to MAD and children's hospitals because spending it would have felt like profiting from his family's death. The insurance companies rebuilt his house. The hospital gave him unlimited bereavement leave. Friends and colleagues surrounded him with sympathy and casseroles and offers to help. But nothing could fill the silence. Michael's house, once filled with laughter and cartoon music and the chaos of family life, became a mausoleum. He kept Emma's room exactly as she'd left it. He kept Sarah's coffee cup and the kitchen counter. He kept their Christmas presents under a tree that stayed up for 6 months because taking it down felt like admitting they were really gone. For the first year, Michael couldn't operate. His hands shook. His concentration wavered. He'd see Emma's face on every child patient, hear Sarah's voice in every woman's laugh. The hospital was patient. Trauma therapy was recommended. Grief counseling was arranged. Time would heal, everyone said. Life would go on. But Michael didn't want life to go on. He wanted December 22, 2009. He wanted the life he'd lost. Slowly, painfully, Michael rebuilt himself around his work. If he couldn't save his own family, he'd save everyone else's. Surgery became his prayer. The operating room, his church. Every life he saved was a small victory against the randomness of death. A tiny protest against the unfairness of the universe. He became the surgeon everyone wanted, but no one wanted to be. Brilliant, tireless, and completely empty inside. For 10 years, Michael threw himself into medicine with the fervor of a monk. He worked 18-hour days. He took every call, covered every shift, accepted every difficult case. His colleagues marveled at his dedication. His patients benefited from his obsession. But late at night, when the hospital was quiet and the last surgery was finished, Michael would stand in the same trauma bay where Emma died and wonder, what would he do if he ever saw David Chen again? What would justice look like? What would revenge feel like? What would Sarah and Emma want him to do? Tonight, 10 years and 298 days after the accident, he was about to find out. October 15th, 2019, 11:47 p.m. Michael was finishing paperwork in his office when the ambulance radios crackled to life throughout the hospital. The sound that had become the soundtrack of his life. Another emergency. Another family's worst day. Another chance to fight death and maybe win. St. Mary's, this is Rescue 7. We've got a male, approximately 35, major MVA with severe chest trauma and possible internal bleeding. Patient is unconscious, vitals unstable. ETA.
What do we know? He asked Nurse Patricia Williams as she prepped the trauma bay. Patricia had worked with Michael for 8 years. She'd seen him at his worst after the accident, watched him rebuild himself into the surgeon he was now. She knew his moods, his methods, his absolute intolerance for anything less than perfection. Single vehicle accident on Lakeshore Drive, Patricia reported, checking the defibrillator. Drunk driver hit a tree doing about 50. No other cars involved, thank God. No passengers either. Thank God indeed. At least this time, the drunk driver had only hurt himself. At least no innocent family was spending tonight in a waiting room praying for miracles. The ambulance doors burst open with a controlled chaos Michael knew by heart. Coming through,
Male, mid-30s, severe blunt force trauma to the chest, possible cardiac contusion, BP dropping fast. We've been bagging him for 10 minutes. Michael fell into his routine like a pianist playing a familiar concerto. Check airway, clear. Assess breathing, shallow and labored. Evaluate circulation, thready pulse, dropping blood pressure. Get him to OR 3, Michael ordered, already mentally cataloging the likely injuries. Tell anesthesia we're coming up hot. Patricia, call blood bank and have 4 units of O-neg standing by. The patient was unconscious, intubated, covered in blood and glass. Just another broken body for Michael to fix, another family member for someone to lose or keep, depending on the next few hours. As they wheeled the gurney toward the elevator, the patient's belongings scattered. His wallet fell open, spilling cards and cash across the floor. A hospital volunteer scrambled to collect everything, making sure nothing got lost in the chaos. Michael glanced down at the mess and saw a driver's license lying face up on the linoleum. David Anthony Chen, born March 15, 1984, address on Ashland Avenue. The world stopped. Every sound in the hospital, the beeping monitors, the overhead pages, the conversations in the hallway, faded to nothing. Michael stood frozen in the corridor while his team rushed his patient toward surgery. David Chen. The man who killed Sarah and Emma, the man who walked free while Michael buried his family, the man who destroyed Michael's world and never looked back. And now he was bleeding out on Michael's gurney, being rushed to Michael's operating room, depending on Michael's hands to save his life. Patricia noticed him standing motionless in the hallway. Doctor? Dr. Rodriguez? The patient is crashing. We need you in OR 3 right now. Michael's training kicked in. Move your feet, follow the gurney, save the patient. The Hippocratic Oath didn't have an exception clause for personal vendettas. But as he walked toward OR 3, Michael's mind raced through possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. One small mistake during surgery, a delayed response, an unforeseen complication, an unfortunate but explainable outcome. Who would question a chief of surgery? Who would doubt that he'd done everything possible? Justice, finally, after 10 years of waiting. The elevator doors opened to the surgical floor. David Chen's unconscious body lay on the gurney, completely vulnerable, completely dependent on the skill and professionalism of the man whose life he'd destroyed. What would you do? OR 3 was Michael's cathedral, sterile, bright, equipped with the finest technology money could buy. Here, Michael was God. Here, he decided who lived and who died. Here, his word was absolute law. The surgical team was already assembled. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, anesthesiologist. Tom Morrison, surgical tech. Patricia Williams, circulating nurse. Dr. Sarah Kim, surgical resident. People who trusted Michael completely, who had worked with him for years, who had never seen him make a mistake or show anything less than total professional competence. They had no idea they were about to witness the ultimate test of medical ethics. "What do we have?" Dr. Walsh asked, as she prepared her equipment. "Blunt force trauma to the chest," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Possible cardiac contusion, probable internal bleeding. We need to get in there and see what we're dealing with." Michael looked down at David Chen's unconscious face for the first time in 10 years. Older now, a few more scars, stubble on his jaw, but unmistakably the same man from the courtroom, the same man who had sat at the defendant's table, looking remorseful, while his lawyer argued for mercy, the same man who got to go home to his family, while Michael went home to silence. "Let's get him under," Michael said. "Tom, I need a thoracotomy tray. Patricia, hang another unit of blood." As Dr. Walsh worked to intubate David, Michael scrubbed in at the sink outside OR 3. The ritual was automatic. Soap, scrub, rinse, repeat. 2 minutes of meditation before every surgery. Time to clear his mind and focus on the task ahead. But tonight, Michael's mind wouldn't clear. He thought about Sarah, 5 months pregnant, getting crushed by a drunk driver who was texting about drug deals. He thought about Emma, practicing with her toy stethoscope, never getting the chance to help anyone. He thought about Miguel, who never drew his first breath because David Chen couldn't wait 5 minutes to meet his dealer. He thought about the trial where David Chen expressed remorse, but never once looked at the family he'd destroyed. He thought about the 31 months David served, while Michael served a life sentence of grief. He thought about the letter David's lawyer had sent, asking Michael to write a victim impact statement supporting early. Michael dried his hands and entered OR 3. The team was ready. David was prepped and draped, his chest exposed, and waiting for Michael's scalpel. "Pressure's dropping," Dr. Walsh announced. "We need to move fast." Michael picked up the scalpel. The weight was familiar, comforting. This blade had saved thousands of lives. It could save one more. Or it could finally deliver justice. "Doctor," Patricia asked quietly, "are you all right? You seem different tonight." Michael looked around the OR. 5 other people, all counting on him to do his job, all believing in the oath he'd taken 15 years ago. First, do no harm. But what about the harm David had done? What about Sarah and Emma, who would never get another chance at life? What about the other families David might destroy if he walked away from this accident like he'd walked away from the last one? Michael positioned the scalpel over David's chest. One cut to open him up. One chance to find the bleeding and stop it. One opportunity to save the life of the man who had killed his family. Or one chance for justice, 10 years delayed. The OR was silent, except for the beeping monitors and the hiss of the ventilator, keeping David alive. Everyone was waiting for Michael to make the first cut. Time slowed. The antiseptic smell of the OR. The fluorescent lights, casting harsh shadows. The steady rhythm of David's heart on the monitor. The heart that was still beating, while Sarah's and Emma's had stopped forever. What would Sarah want him to do? What would Emma think of her daddy if she could see him now? What would Michael be able to live with? One cut to save him, or one cut to end him. Michael raised the scalpel. Michael made the incision. Deep, precise, professional. Just like he'd done thousands of times before. Because in that moment, looking down at David Chen, Michael realized something that changed everything. He wasn't looking at Sarah's killer. He was looking at a patient. "There," Michael said, pointing to a tear in the pericardium. "That's our primary bleeder. Patricia, suction. Tom, I need 4-0 silk and needle drivers." For the next 4 hours and 37 minutes, Michael Rodriguez fought to save the life of the man who had destroyed his life. Every suture was perfect. Every decision was precise. Every movement was guided by 15 years of medical training and a moral code that ran deeper than personal pain. Because Michael realized something in that OR. He was not David Chen. "Dr. Kim," Michael said to his resident, "what's your assessment of the splenic injury?" Dr. Kim examined the imaging. "Grade 3 laceration, sir. Active bleeding. I'd recommend splenectomy." "Conservative approach first," Michael decided. "Let's try to save the spleen. Everyone deserves to keep their organs if possible. Even David Chen. even the man who had taken everything from Michael. As they worked, Michael found himself talking to his team the way he always did during complex surgeries, explaining his techniques, teaching Dr. Kim, maintaining the calm professionalism that had made him legendary at St. Mary's. The key to cardiac trauma, he told Dr. Kim as he sutured the pericardial tear, is patience. Rush the repair and you'll create more damage. Take your time, be precise, and trust your training. Trust your training. Trust your oath. Trust the person you chose to become when you decided to save lives instead of taking them. At 3:17 a.m., David Chen's heart beat steadily on its own. His blood pressure stabilized. His oxygen saturation returned to normal. "That's it," Michael announced, stepping back from the table. "He's stable. Excellent work, everyone." As the team cleaned up and prepared to move David to the ICU, Michael stood over his patient. David looked so ordinary, not the monster Michael had built up in his mind over 10 years of grief and anger. Just a broken human being who had made a terrible mistake and was now getting a second chance at life. A second chance that Sarah and Emma never got. "Doctor," Patricia touched his shoulder gently. "You did good work tonight. That was a complicated save." Michael looked at her, this woman who had worked beside him for 8 years, who had never asked about the sadness in his eyes, or why he never mentioned family during holiday parties. "Patricia," he said quietly, "do you believe people can change?" She considered the question while they watched David's stable vitals on the monitor. "I think people can choose to be better than their worst moments. Don't you?" Michael looked down at David Chen one more time. The man who had killed his family was alive because Michael had chosen to be better than his worst impulses. But the story wasn't over, because when David Chen woke up, he would recognize his surgeon, and what happened next would change both their lives forever. But first, Michael needed to call David's family. Even killers had people who loved them. Even the worst moments in someone's life didn't erase their connections to others. The contact information in David's wallet listed an emergency contact. Maria Chen, wife, phone number with a Chicago area code. Michael stepped into the hallway and dialed the number. It was 4 a.m., but trauma didn't respect normal hours. "Hello," a woman's voice, groggy with sleep. "Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Rodriguez. It's..." Oh my God, is he okay? What happened? I need to come there right now." Michael heard the panic in her voice, the same panic he'd felt 10 years ago when his phone rang with news that would destroy his world. The same desperation, the same fear, the same love that made people drop everything and race to hospitals in the middle of the night. "He's stable, Mrs. Chen. He's going to be okay, but he'll be in intensive care for several days while he recovers." Relief flooded her voice. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. I'll be there as soon as I can. Should I call anyone else?" "His sponsor, his AA group?" Michael paused. "His sponsor?" "Yes, David's been sober for 8 years. He was actually coming home from his Tuesday night meeting when the accident happened. He never drives when he's been drinking anymore. Not since..." She stopped herself. "Not since what, Mrs. Chen?" A long pause. "Not since he killed that family 10 years ago. He spent every day since then trying to make amends. Doctor, you need to understand, my husband isn't a bad man. He made a terrible mistake, and he spent his whole life trying to make up for it." Michael felt the world tilt slightly. "Mrs. Chen, what do you mean about making amends?" "He speaks at high schools about drunk driving. He volunteers at children's hospitals. He's donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to victim advocacy groups. He's tried to contact the family he hurt, but they never responded. He understands why." Michael's hand tightened on the phone. "What family?" "The Rodriguez family, a teacher and her little girl, and their baby. David killed them in 2009, and it destroyed him. He's never forgiven himself. He probably never will." The hallway seemed to spin around Michael. All these years he'd imagined David Chen moving on with his life, forgetting about Sarah and Emma, living without consequences while Michael suffered alone. But David had been suffering too. In his own way, for his own reasons, David had been serving his own life sentence. "Mrs. Chen," Michael said carefully, "I'll see you when you get here. Your husband is in ICU room 12. Michael hung up and leaned against the wall. 10 years of assumptions. 10 years of imagining David Chen as a monster who felt no remorse, who had forgotten his victims and moved on with his life. But David hadn't moved on. He'd built his entire existence around remembering Sarah and Emma. He'd made their memory the foundation of his sobriety, his service, his attempt at redemption. Michael didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, confusion, all of those emotions swirled together as he walked back toward the ICU to check on his patient. The man who had killed his family, the man whose life he had just saved, the man who had spent 10 years trying to become worthy of the mercy Michael had shown him tonight.
David Chen opened his eyes at 11:30 a.m. the next day, confused, groggy, alive. Michael was doing his morning rounds when he got the call from the ICU. "Dr. Rodriguez, the patient in room 12 is awake and asking to speak with his surgeon." Michael's stomach dropped. He'd saved David's life, but he hadn't prepared for this moment. What do you say to the man who killed your family? How do you look into the eyes of your worst nightmare and pretend to be professional? But Michael had to face it. It was part of the job, part of being human. ICU room 12. Michael knocked and entered. David was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Tubes and wires connected him to various monitors. His wife Maria sat beside him, holding his hand. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair, probably in her early 40s. When David saw Michael, his face went completely white. "Dr. Rodriguez?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." You were my surgeon?" "Yes." David stared at Michael for a long moment. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes. The courtroom 10 years ago. The victim impact statements. The man who had sat in the front row every day of the trial, listening to testimony about the family David had destroyed. "December 23, 2009, David whispered. "Sarah and Emma Rodriguez." Michael's jaw tightened. "You remember?" "I remember everything." David's eyes filled with tears. "I've thought about that night every day for 10 years. I've thought about you, about them, about how I destroyed your life and killed your family." Maria looked confused, glancing between her husband and Michael. "David, what's happening? Who is this?" "Maria," David said softly, never taking his eyes off Michael. "This is Dr. Michael Rodriguez. His wife and daughter were the people I killed." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what he did. I'm so sorry for your loss." Michael studied both of them. David's obvious remorse, Maria's genuine horror. These weren't the callous, indifferent people he'd imagined for 10 years. "Why were you driving last night?" Michael asked directly. David shook his head. "I wasn't drinking. I haven't had a drink in 8 years. I was coming back from my AA meeting on Ashland Avenue. A dog ran into the road and I swerved to miss it, hit black ice and lost control. You expect me to believe that?" David reached into his bedside table with trembling hands and pulled out a medallion. 8 years sobriety, Alcoholics Anonymous. "I don't expect you to believe anything," David said. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect your understanding. I just want you to know that I've spent every day since prison trying to become worthy of the life you saved last night." Michael stared at the medallion. 8 years. David had gotten sober "Because I couldn't live with what I'd done," David replied. "I tried to kill myself twice in the first year after prison. But a doctor, Dr. Patterson, he saved my life and told me something that changed everything." Michael's eyes widened. Jim Patterson had been his mentor. "He told me my life wasn't mine to throw away anymore," David continued. "He said it belonged to the people I'd hurt. The only way to honor them was to make sure their sacrifice wasn't meaningless." David looked directly at Michael. "So I got sober, really sober. I dedicated my life to making sure what happened to your family never happens to anyone else." Maria squeezed David's hand. "He speaks at 3 high schools every week. He volunteers at Children's Memorial Hospital.
He's donated over $400,000 to MAD and victim advocacy groups. I know it doesn't bring them back, David said, tears streaming down his face. I know it doesn't fix what I did. But I thought, maybe if I saved enough lives, maybe if I prevented enough tragedies, maybe Sarah and Emma's deaths wouldn't be completely meaningless. Michael listened in stunned silence. For 10 years, he'd carried an image of David Chen as a monster, who felt no remorse, who had moved on with his life while Michael suffered. But David had been suffering too, in his own way, trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of that terrible night. "Why didn't you ever reach out to me?" Michael asked. "Because I didn't have the right," David replied immediately. "What could I say? Sorry? Sorry doesn't bring back your wife and daughter. Sorry doesn't give you back 10 years of happiness. I figured the least I could do was stay out of your life and try to honor them with mine." Michael sat down heavily in the chair beside David's bed. The anger he'd carried for 10 years was still there, but it was mixed now with something else, something he couldn't quite name. "You want to know something?" Michael said finally. "For 10 years, I've imagined this moment, what I'd say to you, what I'd do to you. I never imagined that I was already destroying myself, better than you ever could." Michael looked at David, really looked at him, saw the weight he carried, the guilt, the genuine remorse. The man who had rebuilt his entire life around the memory of the family he'd killed. "Dr. Patterson," Michael said slowly. "He was my mentor. He's the one who taught me that every life is worth saving, even when we don't want to save it." Both men sat in silence, processing the impossible coincidence. "Why did you save my life?" David asked quietly. "You could have let me."
"And us?" Michael paused at the doorway. "David, I need you to understand something. I didn't save your life because I forgave you. I saved it because it was my job, because it's who I am." David nodded. "I understand. But," Michael continued, "I think Sarah and Emma would want me to tell you that what you've done with your life, it matters. It doesn't erase what happened, but it matters." As Michael reached the door, David called out softly, "Dr. Rodriguez, thank you, not just for saving my life, for showing me that good people still exist in this world." Michael paused, his hand on the door handle. "David, don't waste the life I saved. Keep honoring them." St. Mary's Hospital looked the same as always. Same bustling emergency room, same dedicated staff, same mission to save lives and heal the broken. But something had changed for Michael Rodriguez in the months since that October night. He still worked the same long hours, still performed the same complex surgeries, still saved lives with the same precision and skill that had made him legendary. But the weight he carried felt different somehow, lighter maybe, or just different. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Michael got the call that would change everything one more time. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Linda Martinez from Children's Memorial Hospital. We have a special request." Children's Memorial was where David Chen volunteered, reading stories to young patients and talking to teenagers about the consequences of drunk driving. Michael had learned this from Maria during David's recovery, though he'd never mentioned it to anyone. "What can I do for you?" Michael asked. "We have a young patient, 8 years old, who needs cardiac surgery. Her family specifically requested you after hearing about your work
from one of our volunteers. The thing is, this volunteer wanted to know if it would be appropriate for him to visit during her recovery. He's been reading to her for months, and she's grown quite attached to him. Michael knew, somehow before she said the name. David Chen? Yes. He mentioned that you two had a history. He wanted to make sure his presence wouldn't be inappropriate, given your professional relationship with the patient. Michael closed his eyes. An 8-year-old girl. The same age Emma had been. What's the patient's name? He asked. Isabella Rodriguez. No relation to you, just a coincidence with the last name. She has a congenital heart defect that requires surgical correction. Her family heard about your reputation from David, who's been volunteering in her ward. Isabella Rodriguez. Michael felt something shift in his chest.
3 days later, Michael stood outside Isabella's room at Children's Memorial Hospital. Through the window, he could see David Chen sitting beside a small bed, reading from a picture book. The little girl, Isabella, was laughing at something David had said. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, her eyes bright despite the medical equipment surrounding her. She looked nothing like Emma, but she was 8 years old, and facing surgery, and her laughter sounded like music. Michael knocked and entered. Dr. Rodriguez. Isabella sat up excitedly. Mr. David told me all about you. He said you're the best heart doctor in the whole world, and you're going to fix my heart so I can run and play like other kids. David stood up, uncertainty in his eyes. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Hello, Isabella, Michael said, approaching her bed. I hear you need some heart surgery. Mr. David says you're going to make me all better. He says you save people, and that's the most important job in the whole world. Michael looked at David, who was watching this interaction with carefully controlled emotion. Mr. David is right, Michael said. That is the most important job. And yes, we're going to fix your heart. For the next hour, Michael examined Isabella, explained the procedure to her parents, and answered their questions with the same patience and thoroughness he brought to every case. But throughout the consultation, he was aware of David's presence, quiet, respectful, clearly beloved by this little girl. As Isabella's parents signed consent forms, Michael and David stepped into the hallway. She calls you Mr. David, Michael observed. She can't pronounce my last name. She's been fighting this heart condition for 2 years. Strongest kid I've ever met. How long have you been volunteering here? 5 years. Since my 3rd year of sobriety. At first, I could barely get through a story without crying. But the kids, they taught me that you can carry sadness and still find joy. That you can be broken and still help others heal. Michael nodded. They stood in comfortable silence, watching hospital staff move through the corridors, each person carrying their own purpose, their own mission to heal. The surgery is scheduled for Thursday morning, Michael said. I'll take good care of her. I know you will, David replied. You take good care of everyone. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Michael scrubbed in for Isabella's surgery with the same ritual precision he'd followed for 15 years. But as he entered the OR, he carried with him something new. The knowledge that the man who had killed his family was in the waiting room, praying for... When Michael emerged from the OR, David was still there, still waiting, still caring about the outcome for a little girl who had nothing to do with his own redemption but everything to do with his humanity. She's going to be fine, Michael told Isabella's parents. Complete recovery expected. She'll be running marathons if she wants to.
The relief in the room was palpable. Isabella's mother cried, her father shook Michael's hand over and over, and David Chen smiled, the first genuinely happy smile Michael had ever seen on his face. Later that evening, Michael found himself back at Children's Memorial, not for medical reasons, but because he needed to see something. Isabella was awake, groggy but smiling. David was there, of course, reading her another story. This time, it was about a brave little mouse who went on adventures. "Dr. Rodriguez," Isabella called out when she saw him. "Mr. David says my heart is all fixed." "That's right," Michael said, checking her monitors. "You're going to be just fine." "Mr. David says you're a hero," Isabella continued. "He says heroes are people who help others even when it's really, really hard." Michael looked at David, who was studying his hands. "Mr. David is very wise," Michael said. As visiting hours ended and Isabella drifted off to sleep, Michael and David walked together toward the hospital exit. "She's going to make a full recovery," Michael said. "Thank you," David replied, "not just for the surgery, for allowing me to be there, for not asking me to leave." They reached the parking garage. Their cars were on different levels, but neither man moved toward the elevators. "David," Michael said finally, "I need to tell you something." David waited. "For 10 years I've hated you. I've imagined terrible things happening to you. I've wished you were dead. And when I had the chance to let you die, I almost did." David nodded. "I know, I would have in your position. But seeing you with Isabella, seeing how much she trusts you, how much joy you bring to those kids, I think I understand something now." "What's that?" "Sarah and Emma didn't die meaninglessly, not because of what you've done since then, but because of who they were. Sarah taught kids to believe in themselves. Emma dreamed of helping animals. They made the world better just by being in it. And in a strange way, their deaths made you into someone who makes the world better too." David's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." They stood in the concrete garage, two men whose lives had been forever intertwined by tragedy, finally understanding each other. "Will I see you again?" David asked. "You don't have to," Michael said. "Forgiveness isn't the point. The point is what you do with the life you have left. And from what I can see, you're doing something beautiful with it." "I volunteer here too now," Michael said, "teaching kids about medicine, showing them that healing is possible. I think Isabella would like that. She would love that." Michael extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, David shook it. "Take care of yourself, David. You too, Dr. Rodriguez. And thank you for everything." 2 years later, Michael Rodriguez still works at St. Mary's Hospital. He still saves lives with the same skill and dedication that made him legendary. But now he also volunteers at Children's Memorial Hospital, where he teaches young patients about the human heart, how it works, how it heals, how it can be broken and repaired. David Chen continues his work there too. Every Tuesday and Thursday he reads to the children and talks to teenagers about choices and consequences and second chances. Sometimes their volunteer schedules overlap. They nod to each other in the hallways, share brief conversations about patients, work toward the same goal of healing from different directions. Michael has never told David that he's forgiven him, because forgiveness was never the point. The point was choosing who to become in the face of unthinkable loss. The point was deciding whether to let tragedy make you bitter or make you better. Sarah and Emma Rodriguez died on December 23, 2009. Their deaths were senseless, preventable, tragic. But their memory lives on in the lives their father saves and the children their killer protects. In the impossible mathematics of human grief and redemption, perhaps that's as close to justice as we can ever come. At Still Human, we believe the most powerful stories are the ones that challenge our assumptions about forgiveness, justice, and what it means to be human. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't taking a life, it's saving one, even when everything inside you wants to do otherwise. What would you have done in Michael's position? How do we balance justice with mercy? Where do we find meaning in senseless loss? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because every day we share stories that prove humanity is more complex and beautiful than we ever imagined. See you in the next story.